Okay, so welcome back, and this is part 2 of lecture 13 on man-in-the-middle attacks. We'll start out looking at the circuit in the middle ATM attack. So, a very interesting attack where you take a fake card and put that in a card reader, and that's connected with wires. It's kind of hard to believe that this will work in real life, but this is just a proof of concept to show that you can connect up a fake card to the terminal, and then that's connected up to a wire to a circuit which has an FPGA or field programmable gate array, and that's connected to a laptop, and that's got a Python program running, and then it's also connected, let's say by USB, to a card reader which has a stolen card. So the idea is that in the future all of this hardware can be made really small, that it would maybe fit in the palm of your hand or the sleeve of your jacket or something like that, and you would take your fake card and then connect that with all this hardware to a stolen card that's all up your sleeve, and then you would just put that fake card into the, the terminal where at the point of sale. So this was done by this whole circuitry, all of this programming and all of that was set up by researchers in Cambridge. They wanted to show that you can use this flaw in a protocol in the EMV system. EMV is Europay, MasterCard, Visa. They came up with a system to use smart cards that use a PIN number to authenticate the user. So this PIN verification can either be done remotely, that is, it can be done at the issuing bank. That is, you type in a PIN number over here and it goes all the way to your issuing bank, and the bank checks your PIN number, comes back with a response saying that yes, this is the correct PIN number for this card and therefore it must be the correct user. But the thing is, the verification can also be done locally by the terminal. So the problem with this protocol is that this verification step is not authenticated, and so you can create this man in the middle or circuit in the middle where you have all this hardware, things like that, and essentially you can trick the card into thinking that the PIN number will be verified remotely, while you tell the terminal, the point of sale machine, that the PIN was verified locally. So there was a loophole, and the man in the middle or circuit in the middle can pretend to be doing two different things to the two different sides, and essentially get away with not not actually verifying at all. So in the case of this attack, the researchers were able to force local verification and sort of fake out the circuitry that and pretend that it was being done locally, but actually it wasn't. Okay, so once again, another very clever man-in-the-middle attack. You can also have programs in the browser, or I guess you could say a man in the browser. It's not a man, it's programs attack. So web browsers like Firefox, Chrome, Safari, and Edge can execute JavaScript in the same process space as the browser. So process address space. So when you run a browser, you have a process address space, and you can have other code that maybe you don't want executing in the same space, and they can listen in on all of your data or copy all of your data. So these browser plugins are often deployed as library files, that is DLL files, dynamic link library files, and also as JavaScript extensions. So for example, Gmail, I'm guessing all of you use Gmail. It's about 500,000 lines of JavaScript plus some Java and plus C++ code, all bundled together in one big huge package. So if there is some malevolent code in Gmail, it'd be very easy to hide it because it's just so much code. Guessing Gmail is very closely watched and therefore probably not likely to have malware in it, but it's getting to the point where Gmail itself is like a huge, almost like a small operating system. Okay, and another example of a man in the browser, man-in-the-middle browser attack was this Trojan horse called Silent Banker. It was deployed as a browser plugin, and so people would find these plugins, install it, and then later find out there was tons of problems. Because what Silent Banker did was, when you visited a bank site, it had hard-coded in to its code a bunch of sites, that is web addresses of banks, and as soon as you chose one of those, or you went to a website, what you thought was your bank, but it's in Silent Banker's list, then it would kick in and it would record all your user data and forward all of that data to remote sites where it can be used by people who are breaking into your account. So the thing about Silent Banker is that the data was intercepted at the application layer way before encryption happens. So you type in your, let's say, your username and password for your bank, and since Silent Banker is operating in the same process address space as your browser, it can snoop on your data essentially, and it can get all of the data before the browser applies encryption and sends it down the lower layers of the network all the way to the bank. So Silent Banker also modified data received from the bank before it was shown to you, so it could pretend like, even though, if you, let's say you are transferring data to your friend's account, it will take this data, send different data to your bank, have your bank transfer it to a different account, and then when your bank tries to display data in your browser, Silent Banker can intercept that and display it a different data, saying that, oh yeah, you did transfer money to your friend, but in actual fact it was not your friend that you transferred money to, essentially. Okay. Another example of a plugin that was malevolent was one called Web Page Screenshot. It was a Chrome browser plugin that supposedly allowed you to capture or screenshot a site or a web app. But what happened was that it was shown to be spyware. And what it did was track your browsing behavior. It would track all the IP addresses that you went to, your operating system, your information about your hardware. If you're using a mobile device, it record your ID, your contacts, your profile, social network connections, all your search queries that it could find, all the URLs visited, and all of this data, and all of the data in the web pages that you surfed. It saved all this information in a server and then it used it for marketing. So it basically tried to figure out things about you and marketed information to you. So things for advertisements, things like that. One of the things it was especially sneaky about was that, to avoid detection by the Chrome store, this plugin only started collecting data 1 week after you install it. And so any kind of check that Google did for plugins that go into the Chrome store, and they will probably, unless they ran it for more than a week, they won't see all of this activity. So there's this article in tripwire.com that also looks at the same plugin. It turns out it was downloaded more than 1 million times, but you can't find it anymore. It was taken off the Chrome store. There were about 200 other Chrome extensions and plugins that turned out to be adware, and some of them had malware too. So of course Google is cracking down on these things, but sometimes you can get away with a lot until you get caught, I guess. So another example of use of man-in-the-middle attack is for CAPTCHA. So remember what CAPTCHAs are. It stands for Completely Automated Public Turing Test to Tell Computers and Humans Apart. Typically it's a puzzle that people like us, humans, can solve easily, but if you have a computer with maybe a camera trained on this puzzle, it would have trouble trying to figure out what these letters are. It's not super hard for us, but it's really hard for computers to figure out what these letters are. So the main use of CAPTCHAs, if you haven't seen it before, is to make sure that when you're registering for an email account like Gmail, um, that it's actually human registering for this account, not just some program that creates massive number of Gmail accounts and uses it for spam or whatnot. So that's what CAPTCHA is used for, but a way that man-in-the-middle attacks were used on CAPTCHA was this puzzle um, uh, that you're presented with can be shown to an actual human being on a totally different website. And so remember, humans can solve these puzzles very easily, and so the human solves it, and you have to provide some kind of incentive for the human to solve it. Let's say they are getting paid, or they're just getting access to something else, and they are shown this puzzle, and then they solve it. And then when they solve it, what happens is this man in the middle, or this person who's trying to attack these, let's say, email websites, they forward that solution that actual person solved to this email site, and then they get access to an email account, and then maybe the human gets access to something else or gets paid for it or something. So a very clever thing where um, a program can capture part of a puzzle and then have a human solve it for the program. Of course, it's probably a human who designed all of this, but we use the fact that humans can solve these captchas very easily to fake out captchas itself. Okay. The last thing, or the last main topic that I want to look at, is covert channels. So covert channels are not exactly like man in the middle. It sort of is. It's some program that sits inside, let's say, some sensitive computer or location of some device, and then snoops on things, and then the assumption is that if it tries to send out this data, it'll get filtered out. So it has to exfiltrate this data very covertly. It has to, so it's like a spy that has to send its contact some information, but wants to avoid detection. So a covert channel is like a man on the outside, sort of the same idea as a man in the middle. Okay, so it's probably, let's say there's an actual, like, legitimate user accessing some data, and some service program sits in between and then sends out some sensitive data very slowly, usually, to some spy on the outside. And so the idea is that this transmission has to be hidden. It can be very simple things, like maybe like the absence of a file or the presence of a file. And so it's going to be, in this case, would just be a 1-bit channel. Of course, you can make this more parallel. You can scale this up. You can use like multiple files, and let's say it's in this first example, it's just like, let's say, the presence of a file, or in this case, actually, it's the locking of a file. So most operating systems will allow you to lock a file so that no other program can modify a file while you are potentially modifying a file. So let's say, let's say we have the service program, which is actually in cahoots with the spy. It will lock a file, and then the on the other side, the spy's contact will try to lock the file as well. If it cannot lock it, that means it's already locked, because only one program can lock it. And so it must have been the service program. So that's maybe in an encoding for 1, or binary 1. And so let's say later on, the spy's contact tries to lock it again with some fixed time interval, and then it is able to lock. That means that the service program did not lock it or unlocked it. And so that may be interpreted as a 0 by the spy's contact. So this can go on, and this can be done pretty fast. You can lock and unlock very quickly. It just takes maybe less than a millisecond to do that. And so you can transmit data at 1 bit per millisecond or 1 kilobit per second. It's not very fast, but of course you can scale up. You can have maybe hundreds of these files and ramp up the speed if you have to. But typically, covert channels are slow. You can't have rapid communication. The thing is, all of this transmission is hidden, can't be detected. Another way to do it might be to create and delete files. So let's say a service program um, signals one by creating a file, and then the spy's contact program just checks if the file exists. If it does exist, then that means it's a 1, and the service program in the next point in time, and of course they have the service program, which is the inside spy, and the spy's program or the contact outside. They are in cahoots and they're synced up. They have a clock. Let's say they somehow share. They can just agree on some timing, and then so the next time instant the service program can delete the file, and then when the spy's contact or the spy's program checks if the file exists, there's no file, that means it's a 0. And then if the service program leaves the file deleted and the spy's program checks it again in the next time interval and there's no file, then that's another 0. So this way you have sent a 1 0 0. The creating the file is a 1, deleting the file 0, and leaving the file deleted is another 0, and so on. So this might be a little bit slow, but at least you avoid detection by doing things slowly. Another way to transmit data might be using timing, and so the example in the book is probably a little bit unrealistic in that it's assuming that there's only 2 users on a program on a computer system, and they are somehow able to get the program scheduled in such a way that if it's, let's say, the service program first and then the spy's program, that is interpreted as a 1. And then if the spy program runs next, or let's say the service program runs again and the spy program, that's another 1. But if it's a spy's program in the next pair of time slots, if it's spy's program first and then the service program, that's interpreted as 0. So it's the order in which things are scheduled. Of course, this is a little bit unrealistic, but you can take this, because these days any program, any computer system, even your smartphone, has hundreds of processes running, and so that makes it very difficult to transmit stuff like this. But this could be also anything else, like some kind of maybe any kind of service that you might be able to share some resource in, can allow you to do this kind of timing attack. So these covert channels can be detected by keeping track of what resources are available for access by subjects, and there are ways to detect patterns in what's shared between 2 programs. And if you can see that 2 programs are sharing common resources somehow, then you know that something is up. And so these kinds of things actually can be detected, but it is just take a little bit of work. All right. So the main ideas in man-in-the-middle attacks were that these man-in-the-middle attacks break confidentiality and integrity. Those are the main things. And of course, authenticity is essentially part of integrity. And all of these cases, I'm going to scroll back up. There were vulnerabilities, and the vulnerabilities were often protocol weaknesses. So in the case of the circuit in the middle attack on EMV systems, the main protocol weakness was that you could actually force authentication to be done locally or remotely. And so I guess it's a reasonable thing to do, but once again, that was a weakness that was exploited by this circuit. In the case of DNS, the attacks relied on unwarranted trust. So in DNS spoofing, the protocol designer's thinking was that since DNS, trying to be a DNS server was not easy, then any message coming from a DNS server must be good. Of course, that's we know now that once we've seen DNS spoofing, we know that no, any message coming from a DNS server, it's not necessarily good. It might be someone spoofing your DNS system. And so the way things are, for every DNS server or router, to save all the names is just not feasible, and so you have to use this very distributed system. And as with certificate authorities and routers in general, it's a very distributed system. Any one of these points, there's so many points, there's such a huge surface to attack, and so um, it's just not feasible to actually just have one point source for everything, whether it's DNS names or routing information, um, or any of those things. It's we have to deal with this distributed system, and so every point has to be secure to avoid man-in-the-middle attacks. Okay, so I hope if you have any questions, feel free to contact me.